Books on Tape presents The Serpents' Trail by Sue Henry, read by Lee Adams. Chapter 1. A partially open door always has a question in it. At the end of a 4,000-mile road trip, I stood on the back porch of Sarah Nunamaker's large Victorian house in the center of Grand Junction, Colorado, uneasily considering the half-open door that swung ever so slightly as the curious fingers of a dying breeze reached in under the sheltering roof to give it a tentative nudge. After robust and extended use of the heavy brass knocker on the front door had resulted in nothing but echoes and silence from within, I had made my way through a side garden and around to the backyard, glancing up at each window that I passed for evidence of occupation within. At well after 8 o'clock, in the dark of the mid-September evening, all of them showed nothing but the mottled reflection of a street light that filtered in between the curbside trees. Only one, a rear second-story pane, held a soft hint of illumination that crept through the lace curtains of a room I knew from past visits was Sarah's bedroom. The discovery of that partially open back door had me frowning in concern as I considered the situation. I knew that my arrival had been anticipated, so something was wrong. Had there been an unpredicted turn for the worse in Sarah's condition? Had she been transported to the local hospital? It would explain why there was no one to respond to my summons at the front door. The light that was barely visible in that upper room could have been left on in the rush that resulted from a medical emergency. But why that light and no other? And why an open door if no one was at home? It was later than I had expected to arrive in Grand Junction, but as I had driven the last few miles into town, a late summer storm had swept in with a ferocity of wind, thunder, and lightning that had sent pedestrians lunging into doorways and dashing under trees for shelter from an unanticipated barrage of hail that preceded the tempest's primary thrust. For a few menacing minutes, pearls of ice had rattled and rebounded from pavements and roofs before rolling into gutters, where they were swirled away into storm drains by the 5 minutes of torrential rain that followed before they could melt. The sudden elemental assault had forced me to pull my Winnebago motorhome off the road and wait it out. The clatter of hail playing the roof like a snare drum had roused my mini-dachshund Stretch from his nap in a basket that hung from the front of the passenger seat's backrest and set him barking defensively at the threat he couldn't identify. "Cool it, you silly gala," I told him, reaching across to lay a calming hand on his head. "It's only noise that can't hurt us." Even when caught out in one, I have always enjoyed the energy and abrupt force and crash of thunderstorms, which are not common where I live in Alaska. They are like grand music, with kettle drums and cymbals within a string and woodwind orchestra of falling, splashing water. My favorite exhibitions are the ones that occur at night, with lightning hurled like fireworks from the sky, immediately followed by the thunder's growl, exciting and stimulating to the senses. This storm was not without welcome, as it cooled and added humidity to the hot, dry air. The last few days of travel through Idaho, Utah, and finally into western Colorado had been warmer than I was used to in the far north, or had expected in the lower 48 this late in the summer. Though the Winnebago has efficient air conditioning, I hate the feeling of being sealed inside a box of any kind, moving or otherwise. I can't escape the feeling that eventually I may breathe all the oxygen out of the air and wind up gasping like a fish out of water. I feel the same way about hotels with unopenable windows and avoid them if possible. So I had dressed in a cool sleeveless blouse and my denim traveling skirt and let the warm air blow in through open windows most of the time as we approached the high desert of the Colorado Plateau through Utah. Over as abruptly as it had begun, in 15 minutes the storm had moved away and the wind had died to a zephyr, leaving water gurgling down drains and the leaves and branches of trees bent with the weight of leftover rain they were shedding. The scent of ozone faded, and that of damp vegetation and the rain evaporating from hot pavement drifted in as I made my way through half-remembered streets, finally locating Sarah's familiar address on Chipeta Avenue, a block south of Gunnison, in the center of town. I was tired after the long trip. Still, it had taken less time than usual for me to drive the highway from Alaska to Colorado, because most days I had traveled farther than normal by spending longer hours on the road. On other trips down the Alaskan Highway, I had taken my time, stopping to enjoy visits to favorite places and people along the way. It is a journey of spectacular scenery, in which I always take pleasure, and had done on this trip, though I had skipped several of my customary intermissions. A soak in Leard Hot Springs, an overnight with friends at Dawson Peaks Resort in Teslin, an always fascinating visit to the Jasper Rock Shop, a stop at the Carousel by the riverbank in Missoula. In leaving Alaska, however, I had indulged myself a little by taking a favorite cutoff, rather than traveling straight down the Alaskan Highway to the Canadian border crossing. 11 days earlier, I had stood beside my 30-foot Mini-Winnie motorhome and gazed west into my home state before entering Canada from a turnout at the highest point on the top-of-the-world highway between Alaska and Dawson City, in the Yukon Territory, 4,515 feet above sea level. Looking back across 100 miles of ridge after purple-blue ridge of mountains that formed the Alaska Range, I had wondered how long it would be before I would see them again. My hair is thick and dark brown, with more and more silver each year. I wear it long enough to use a clip to fasten it high on the back of my head in a kind of twist that keeps it off my neck. As I stood there and appreciated the incredible view, the wind tugged several strands loose and blew them across my face. Noticing that silver, for a moment or two I wondered if it was still a good idea, at 63 years old, to be leaving all that was familiar and safe to take to the road again. I couldn't help smiling, however, as the satisfaction of pleasing no one but myself replaced the momentary hesitation. My smile widened, and I felt like a child running away from home with an extra-large satchel full of all her favorite toys and snacks. I love to drive, and there aren't that many roads in Alaska where we climb onto airplanes the way most of the world drives or catches a bus. It was, as ever, exhilarating to be traveling again, though my destination was more specific and less carefree than usual. My short-legged mini-dachshund companion had trotted off to explore the rocks and weeds around the edge of the turnoff, his ears flapping slightly in the wind. He ignored my first "come along" stretch. Glad to be free of his leash, he asserted the independence of his breed by pretending he hadn't heard me and trotted a bit farther away. "Come here, you," I told him firmly, taking a step in his direction. "Time to go if we want to get across the Yukon before the ferry stops running. I want dinner tonight in Dawson City, when I don't have to cook for myself." He cocked his head to look back and make sure I was serious, then came padding back cheerfully enough and allowed himself to be lifted into the motorhome and deposited in his padded basket. It raised him up for a comfortable view of the passing scenery, which he loves, so he immediately scrambled up to put his front feet on the edge, ready for whatever was coming next. I hesitated long enough to move the hands of my watch an hour ahead, remembering that the time changes as you cross into Canada, then put the Winnebago in gear and drove back onto the well-maintained gravel width of the top of the world. I made a quick stop a few minutes later at the border to assure the friendly customs agent that I carried no contraband and would be passing straight through parts of Yukon Territory, British Columbia, and Alberta on my way down to the Old Country, as I at times refer to the 48 contiguous United States. Crossing international borders always makes me cross my fingers as I tell one falsehood that would probably show up as a significant spike in a lie detector test. When I bought the Winnebago and knew I would be once again traveling alone, I hired a trusted neighbor to build a secret sliding panel over a hidey hole large enough to stash a shotgun with extra shells. This is definitely illegal if it is not.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?